You may have seen recently that there has been a debate on about what we should be teaching children in the history curriculum at school. And this is a question that I've been interested in, not just in terms of history, but in pretty much all school subjects, thinking about, what are we teaching at school? Why are we teaching it? Should we even be structuring school in the way that we are at the moment for children? And, why are we even teaching them in the first place? Thinking back to my own education in the government-run primary school of the United Kingdom, I remember the first history lesson that we had, or the first one that I can remember, is the Great Fire of London, which I'm sure any of you who are educated in the United Kingdom had a similar lesson. And when I asked my father, who teaches history to older children than primary school, but when I asked him why he thought they teach children about the Great Fire of London, considering it's an important event, especially for the people who were alive at the time, but it doesn't seem like the most important event you could teach children. It's not like the very first thing that you'd want them to know. But he said that it's not about teaching historical facts to children, it's about teaching them how to compare different sources of information. And for me, that was a bit of a light bulb moment, because that's what I have been thinking regarding education and just parenting in general, about how, or rather about what we should be teaching people, which is not, information, but skills, and especially skills to find out information for oneself. And in an age of unprecedented access to information, it's much more useful to teach people how to critically analyze information and how to find information, how to compare different sources and assess the biases of the people who are writing these sources, rather than just trying to teach, oh, this is the year that this happened and this is the name of the person who was involved. There might have been a time, maybe before the internet or before wide access to libraries and encyclopedias, where knowing facts like that would be useful, but now that you can find those things out very quickly, I think it's much more useful to be able to teaching how to learn things rather than teaching things just as a kind of as a list, as I said before. The other thing that I think is great about using the Great Fire of London as an example of this, as a sort of historical event to study, is that it's completely non-political. So you can be pretty confident that the teacher does not have a political agenda or any kind of bias when teaching it, because who cares, right? It's you can have a different opinion about why the fire started, how it started, what happened afterwards. There are differing theories as to all of those things, but it's not going to be a kind of a really strongly held emotional belief that the teacher is going to want to impart on the students. And so now I'm of the mind that the Great Fire of London lesson is actually a pretty good lesson to be lesson number 1 in the curriculum on history, or anywhere in there. And so we have to come on to the question of sure, we can teach these historical skills, the ability to analyze history and to read history, but we're inevitably going to need to choose some examples of subjects to explore in this way. And so we still have to address the question of which historical topics, which parts of history are we going to teach children, and in what order and in what way. And whoever you ask, you'll inevitably hear somebody say that such and such a political event should have been covered better, or was completely absent from their own historical education at school, and that this should be included. It could be Soviet Union and gulags, or it might be the British Empire in such and such a country. The first time I discussed this topic was when I was visiting Hong Kong on a research trip with my university and my other university students who I was there with. We got into a very heated debate about the British Empire's presence in Hong Kong, which up until that point, when we actually visited Hong Kong personally, we'd known very little about. And so it was a little bit embarrassing to be visiting Hong Kong as British students and barely knowing the history that all of the the native people there were fully aware of our own country. Inevitably, you cannot teach even one country's entire history to students in any depth. There's only really a few years where history is a compulsory subject, and so in those few years when the child is old enough to understand something like the British colonies, it's impossible to teach British students the entirety of British history from 1066 or Magna Carta going all the way up to modern day Falklands War or something. Which is why, as I said at the start, it's important to teach students how to learn history for themselves if they're interested or if it becomes important. If they're visiting Hong Kong, it might be good to teach yourself a little bit of history about that place and about your own country's involvement in that area. But we do have to pick some subjects, right? There needs to be some examples that we choose in order to teach this subject. And it's up to the people who choose the curriculum whether those events that you choose from history make your country look good or make your country look bad. And I think at the moment, there's been a lot of critical analysis of Britain's history, and a similar thing is going on in America, and I think the British phenomenon is kind of like a copy of the American phenomenon, as so often is the case. But the question at the moment is, should we teach students in Britain to be proud of being British? Should we teach them that the history of Britain is one that they can be proud of? And I'm not going to pretend that all of British history can be divided into two columns, where one column is times where we were the goodies and times where we were the baddies. Of course, things are much more complicated than that. There is a kind of spectrum of different historical events that could be viewed this way. And inevitably, when you pick one that is kind of more politically charged, it will be taught in a way that is perhaps more biased either one way or the other, depending on the teacher that you have, or depending on who is writing the curriculum. And so history is perhaps the most politicized subject that you can teach in school. In my opinion, I think it's very creepy almost to teach students in a government-run school, government-funded, government-planned school. I find it very creepy to teach students either to hate their own country or to love it. That seems, either way, I don't like the feel of that. If you fill students' heads with nothing but positive stories about their own country's history and times when Britain was awesome and came in and saved the day, kind of like how World War II is taught, then it kind of comes across as a kind of almost fascistic, kind of like a Starship Troopers dystopia.
Young people from all over the globe are joining up to fight for the future.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part too.
They're doing their part. Are you? Join the mobile infantry and save the world. Service guarantees citizenship.
It seems like blatant manipulation of the youth in order to make them the soldiers of the future. But then on the other hand, I think it's very sort of self-destructive and masochistic and almost cruel to teach students that they come from an awful country with a really terrible history of things that we've done that have been awful to other countries. And so maybe it's better to stick to subjects like the Great Fire of London and the Black Death, the Plague, things that are very important that happened a long time ago, and that aren't really politicized in the modern day the way that the British Empire and World War II are now. I think what makes the subject of education so difficult to figure out is that there's such a wide range of students that you have to teach at a government-run, completely open school. You're going to have children in your class who are really interested in history and who like to learn about that sort of stuff. They're going to go on to go to university. They might become academics. They could become historical scholars, and you have to inspire a love of history in students who have an aptitude for it like that. And then there's also students who don't care about history at all, who really it would be a miracle if they came out of if they came out of the school system knowing that Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister during the Second World War, and that he took over from Neville Chamberlain, and that Adolf Hitler was the Chancellor of Germany. Just basic facts like that about World War II, a very important event in our country's recent history. It seems like if you're teaching history for just a little bit of cultural awareness about our own country, it would be better just to list off some facts that it's best that children should know, because trying to inspire a love of the subject just isn't feasible in the case of some or even most children, I think. And I guess that's just part of a larger problem with school, is that I think we don't really know what education is supposed to be for. Like, is it supposed to be enriching the intellectual minds of students, or is it just giving them the skills that they need to get by, that they're going to use in their future jobs and their future lives? Ultimately, you don't know what a student is going to be when they're older. They might go to university and become an intellectual academic, or they might become a housewife, or go to they might become a carpenter, and those are all very valid and interesting ways to live your life, and they're just not all going to use the same set of skills and the same set of information. But now I'm getting very far off topic, so I'm going to leave it there for now. I'd like to talk about education more in the future. It's something that I am interested in. I come from a family, a lot of us are teachers. I'm not a teacher, but it's a family tradition that I've not taken part in. But when you become a parent, you become a teacher whether you like it or not, so it's a subject that I've kind of been forced to think about. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that topic as always, so please leave your comments below. I read all the comments. I can't respond to all of them, I'm sorry, but I do read them, and I do appreciate it when people respond to things that I've said, or just, saying your random stuff about whatever. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again soon.